Tonight we're grateful for having U.S. Navy Admiral Sandra Adams here with us, who is going to share with us her insights and stories about her tour in Afghanistan. She spent a year in Afghanistan and at the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Interior, helping with the training of Afghan National Police and Afghan National Army. Admiral Adams, thank you so much for joining us. We're really thankful for having you here at the show, and we're looking forward to sharing your insights with our audience who really want to know what it's like in Afghanistan, how the training of the National Police and Army is coming along, and we want to hear it from your perspective. If you can give our viewers a little bit of insight, but first, if you could just give us your first impression of when you first landed in country.
Well, first, thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to talking about my experience there. My first impression of Afghanistan is as difficult of a history as, particularly in the last 30 years, has been there. Wonderful people. I had a chance to work with some fantastic men and women in the Ministry of Defense, and I left there with friends still in country, and look forward to telling a little bit of the story today.
Absolutely. Now, a lot of folks that do go to Afghanistan, they either fall in love with the scenery, they fall in love with the Afghan textiles, they fall in love with the people or whatnot. And I was really happy to hear your insights as far as how some of the training was coming along, specifically an area that's of interest to me, which is the integration of women into the training, because I have a mother, I have a wife, I have a sister, and they're all professionals, and they're professionals back home. And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about that. But if we could talk at the higher level about the training itself, how is that coming along? There's a myth that the training itself is maybe one-sided, only a certain segment of population are involved. Can you give us your perspective on that?
Yes, let me set a little groundwork maybe that might help the audience understand kind of the context that I'll talk about. Well, one is that of all of the coalition that's in ISAF, only about 3%, and I was part of that 3%, is involved with helping the Afghan National Security Forces develop itself and put training in place. So this about 3,000, 2,000 people working with the Afghan military, and I'll focus on the Afghan National Army because that's the part that I supported, are dedicated to putting capacity in place so that Afghanistan can recruit, train, and assign its own military forces to provide its own security. So under ISAF, NATO Training Mission Afghanistan is the organization that's dedicated to doing that. About 2,000 people in that organization. I was one of about 150 advisors assigned to Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Interior to help advise at the more senior levels. Okay. And I advised the Assistant Minister of Defense for personnel and education and training policies. So I had a unique perspective to be able to witness and to help watch how Afghanistan is putting incredible capabilities into growing its army in place. A good example of that, I gave you a photo I just love to talk about, one of my favorite days. The Afghan Army has to build officers and enlisted in its army. Right. In 2009, the Army was only 97,000 soldiers. And today, it's 195,000 soldiers.
That's a big growth.
That's a huge growth in such a short period of time. And with only 3,000 Afghan trainers, they have put this process in place where they can build this army, and it's starting to plateau into the size that they want to have. But it not just grew in numbers, but also in capability, where it's not just soldiers with rifles, but they've also put in place 12 branch schools that teach them logistics and medical and other types of military intelligence and other types of functions that any national army has to be able to have.
So it's a self-sufficient force.
Exactly.
Okay.
And while the coalition has played a big role in helping fund and guide how that should happen, those classes are all taught by Afghan soldiers and officers. And that has taken several years to put in place, but it's there now, and therefore that's the Army's not just larger, it's more capable.
More capable, right. And so, like you said, if you put people out there who can only function in one area, with us providing logistics at some point as we draw down, they're not going to be able to provide for themselves. But now we're building the entire gamut. So let's talk about training itself, specifically recruiting. How was it that we were able to go from 97,000 and grow it 100%?
Well, the Afghan Army has a recruit command that works around the country to help recruit soldiers or potential soldiers into the Army. Not everyone who puts in to be in the Army makes it. There are standards.
There is a vetting process.
That's
okay.
right. And I'll give an example of the National Military Academy for Afghanistan. This is the National Academy to put officer candidates through a 4-year education and training system so that they come out as commissioned officers in the Afghan Army. And this was reestablished shortly after the coalition came, but just in the year that I was there, they expanded to, for the 400 seats available in the academy, 4,000 men came from all over Afghanistan, from every province, trying to compete for one of those 400 positions.
And that's one of the pictures that you sent in. This is the picture. Now I'm looking at a picture, and it looks like a sea of people here. How are these people chosen? In other words, were they all from Kabul because that's where the military academy is, or did they come from other provinces, and was there a vetting process?
That's a great question, because the Afghan government had made it clear through its national policies and had directed MOD, and the Minister of Defense had also put orders out to the rest of the Army that said, we want representation from every part of Afghanistan. So the government and the Ministry of Defense worked with all the provincial governors to make sure that they had candidates. And I personally saw the list of the candidates, and every province had representatives there to compete for some of these 400 positions. What you see in this photo here are these trunks. They actually have just unsealed these trunks. The Ministry of Higher Education helps develop the test so that there's a fair test. And nobody has seen this test before, so it's fair, anybody can take it, there's no advantage from who you are, and the exams are being pulled out by the senior Afghan leaders there to be handed out to the 4,000 candidates that you see out there in the background.
And so you have the Ministry of Education involved. Now, the literacy rate in Afghanistan's awful. It's not where it should be. For a third world country, it's certainly low, let alone for the West. What about those folks that were illiterate? Were they able to partake in some level of training or be involved in this, or was this just for the officers?
Because the officers, the leaders of the Afghan Army are expected to be able to read orders and follow orders, a minimum literacy level was probably required.
Okay.
So not everybody would be competitive to get into the National Military Academy of Afghanistan, because it is a higher level educational institution that takes those candidates and develops them into top performing officers that they can go in and lead. And so they need to be able to read going in, be able to do that. But I'd like to talk about the literacy training that we've also put in place for the soldiers, because not every soldier comes in, to your point, in knowing how to read. Every single soldier now goes through literacy training when they join the Afghan National Army. Okay. We have started that several years ago, and when I say we, by the way, I mean the Afghan National Army, with support, sometimes funding, or in fact usually funding from the coalition, but with guidance from the coalition. But it truly is the Afghan leaders that have put this in place. A good example of the 197,000 soldiers who are in the Afghan National Army, every single one is going through literacy training at some level, all over Afghanistan. 50% have achieved some kind of literacy level certification. So it's not just go to a class and be done with it. There are grading, and we're trying to encourage people to go on. Okay. Right. The MOD hired 2,800 Afghan instructors just for literacy, and they are teaching in classrooms, 1,500 classrooms around the country in every province for the Afghan National Army. So even if they're stationed in different areas, they can get that training. The coalition provided $200 million in investment so that they could hire the instructors and provide the classrooms, have the course material and things that are needed. And today, 50% of the Afghan National Army has achieved some level of literacy. Now, wow, whether they choose to stay in the Army in the longer term, or if they go back to their village and help with their business and their family's business, that's helping.
Still positive.
That's very
Absolutely.
positive and going to help Afghanistan grow.
Absolutely. The foundation of any society really is education. The reason why the West has done so well is because of education. As you teach people, they go on and teach others, and they're able to help essentially the community rise. And this is actually a good thing. So we're not looking at it from just one perspective that, this is all training and literacy just for the military. I'm a big advocate of education, so I'm happy to hear about that. Let's talk a little bit about the specific training itself. Now, we have literacy training, but how far is the training? Here in America, we have basic training, for example, and that'll last, a couple months or 3 months. How long is it over there?
How long is the training go for?
The initial training.
I think for basic training, for not just literacy, literacy is included in it, but all of the training that soldiers go through, I believe, is 8 weeks for basic training to go through. It depends on what type of training. For example, when a soldier comes in and goes through the basic training, they're getting their uniforms issued and their gear issued. They're being taught how to use that, how to function, not just as an individual within the Army, but as a team. What are people's roles and responsibilities, and how do you follow orders? What are legal orders, right? Because we don't just follow any orders, we follow legal orders. And then after they graduate, those who show proficiency and interest in going to other branches, they can continue their education, such as we were talking about logistics. The Army previously has been very dependent on the coalition for transportation and for managing uniform issues and equipment issues. Well, that's changed significantly in the last couple of years as the Afghan Army has developed its logistics capability and strengthened it, so that the soldiers might come out needing to learn how to drive a truck or how to operate inventory in a warehouse so that they can keep track of all of the things that an Army has to have to run. Food service, being able to feed an Army.
Absolutely.
And to do that safely. You take those things for granted, but the Army can't just go out in the economy and get fed.
Get food, absolutely. There's always that big joke, how do you feed an Army? So would you say that as far as self-sufficiency, where are they in a scale, let's say from 0 to 100%? You talked about logistics, you talked about training, you talked about development of the curriculum, and even having different ministries involved. Would you say that they're about 80% self-sufficient, a little bit less, a little bit more?
It's hard to put an actual number on it, and I would actually refer you to ISAF. Might be a great place to double check on the transition, because as you know, as part of the transition, processes gone through Tranche 1 and Tranche 2, where portions of Afghanistan, Afghan National Security Forces are now in the lead for security in some of these portions. I'm not prepared to talk about exactly where we are with that, but I know we are on track for where Afghanistan wants to be in taking the lead in security between now and 2014.
Absolutely. Okay. Now you brought us some other pictures as well. If we could talk a little bit about the second picture that you mentioned, which is the student taking the exam.
Yes, I love this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures of Afghanistan, because here is a man, and I don't know him, I didn't speak with him, but he's in the sea of 4,000 people, and you can see how serious he is. He's excited for his family. He has come thousands of miles to Kabul to represent his country, to serve his country, and to try to be one of the 400 who are chosen. He's looking at his exam, he's thinking about it, he's probably been preparing, and he's anxious. And to me, that's the hope of Afghanistan, partly right there, a future leader. In whether he was accepted or not, he's obviously an ambitious man who's trying to lean forward and do what's right for his family and his country.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that he was chosen from the provinces. Let's talk a little bit about that, because there is a myth that, it's the armies, for example, ran by the Northern Alliance. They have all the power, the capital's based there, and so some of the Southerners claim that they feel alienated. Can you talk a little bit about how these folks were chosen from the provincial level?
I know from the policies that I saw the Ministry of Defense develop and implement, that the General Staff also has plans that go to every part of Afghanistan. They have recruiting representatives in every part of Afghanistan, and they try to talk with the villages and encourage as many people to come. The coalition helps the Afghan National Army measure what is the Afghan Army population, where is it from, because they want a national army. They don't just want somebody from one region or another. if a country, just like my own country, is going to have a national army,
Right.
you have to have representatives from all walks of life in all parts of the nation. So while I don't think they're where they want to be, they have put the capacity in place to be able to recruit from and transport people to where the basic training is. And all of the people from all over Afghanistan have equal opportunity to come into the Army. And the Ministry of Defense is encouraging that, measuring it so that we can try to figure out what else can be done to make it as balanced of an Army as possible.
Okay.
At all ranks.
At all ranks, right. Now, what about metrics? Are there some metrics that you can share with us?
I don't have the metrics with me, but I can tell you that every month while I was in there, the Afghan military and the coalition was helping the Afghan military measure every month what the population representation was, and then they would talk about what else can we do, different seasonal swings in recruiting, of course, with farming and that
Right.
kind of thing. And so talking every month and every year about what can be done to try to help encourage people and be as fair and balanced as possible.
Okay. Now, you mentioned about this fellow who's taking the exam and that you didn't talk with him directly, but did you have a chance to talk to one or two people just to get a sense of why they want to serve?
I did not, and I'll tell you, this was a very tightly run, very much controlled. They're taking exams,
Of
so
course, you couldn't be in there.
I couldn't walk up
Show bias.
and talk to them. But
Right.
yeah, I will say that while I dealt with a lot of senior officers because I was at Ministry of Defense and I was advising senior levels, I really enjoyed talking to the young people who were in those offices too, whether they were officers or enlisted, and finding out, first of all, they wanted to be employed. They wanted to be able to have money and income so that they could take care of their families.
Naturally.
And having an opportunity to serve in the Army while there's so much dramatic changes going on, they're very excited about it. I was very impressed with the young officers. Many of them spoke English. And so we would sit and have discussions about their experiences and what their hopes are. And I'm very excited about particularly the young people who
The
are joining the
potential.
Army and are trying to help lead. And again, not everybody stays in the military for their whole career.
Right.
These are people going to take that experience and go back to their villages and help lead Afghanistan towards the future.
Absolutely. Now, you brought us some more pictures as well, and I was looking through these earlier. Here we have another picture. Can you talk about this one here, the OCS grad?
Well, since not everybody can get into the academy, because there were at the time only 400 seats in the academy, and I think that's growing. You can also become an officer in the Afghan National Army by going through Officer Candidate School. And I don't remember how, believe that's a 4-month or 6-month course. And this is an example of an officer who's just receiving his commission. He's successfully completed it, and he's saluting the first deputy minister for the Ministry of Defense. And in the next photo, he turns and commits himself to his country, to serve his country, in holding up his graduation certificate, and you can see everybody applauding him. This is in a large auditorium there in Kabul where the training is happening, and you can't tell, but the media was there. It was it was a big deal, these guys graduating and serving their country.
Absolutely. You could see the sense of pride in the way he's holding up the certificate and how he's standing up.
Yes, and he's shouting his dedication and commitment to serving.
Oh, is that right? Okay, great. And you also brought us some pictures that I particularly want to talk about, which is the integration of women back into the workforce, specifically into the security forces there. Can you talk a little bit about how that transition's coming along and what the training is like for them? Is it essentially the same? Do they serve in the same place? Is it the same type of training? Are they allowed to be in the same areas?
Great questions. About 3 weeks after I got to Afghanistan, I was invited to go to the first Women's Officer Candidate School graduation. I didn't even know at that point that women had started to go to Officer Candidate School officially in 2010. And thanks to coalition funding and Ministry of Defense support, that was in place. The women go through the exact same training as the men.
Okay.
They won't serve in exactly the same way, but they go
Right.
through the exact same training. And this photo is of a couple of the first 29 women who graduated with commissions officially. Now, actually, there are about 300 women already in the Army before this first graduation happened. They had received commissions either let's say, before the Soviets invaded, and there's lots of
Right,
different
from the
different ways
past.
that women have come in. There's actually 3 women generals in the Afghan National Army, and there are women enlisted serving in medical roles or in logistics roles, that kind of thing, and administrative roles for the officers, and the officers serve in medical roles and some administrative roles as
Right,
well.
right.
But what I think what's different now, and I'm very excited about it, is that these women are officially being put through very high quality training. Several more classes have happened since then. They're going into fields ranging from aviation. Some of the women are flying.
Right. I did see a picture with
Yes.
helicopter pilots.
Military intelligence,
Right.
logistics, administration, and those kinds of things. And to your point, they're being placed in positions primarily in offices right now, kind of staying, definitely Afghanistan has not made any decisions to put women out in the field,
Right.
so mostly an office environment. But the staff to start somewhere, and this is a
Absolutely.
great way for them to perform. And when I've talked to the men who work with them, they've had nothing but great things to say about what they bring to the table.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a difference here I see with the picture. 2 different colors of veil that they have there. There's black and brown. What's the significance there?
Yeah, I had to ask about that, because particularly when I noticed that this woman was receiving a medal from the Minister of Defense Wardak. I mean, it's very impressive. Very few people get such an honor. This was at the graduation. The woman with the brown scarf is an instructor. Okay. So, of course, the women are training other women as part of the OCS. Coalition is helping advise the Afghan women trainers, but these are women who've been in the military for a while. And so Minister Wardak was honoring the lead instructor for her performance in helping establish and succeed at the first Women's Officer Candidate School.
Okay, and that's where the commendation is with the medal and also
That's
with the
correct.
certificate.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There's also one other picture that is really caught my eye that you sent over. Can you talk about these children?
Yes, this was taken on May of 2011, the 100th International Women's Day. And it's a big deal. It's celebrated
worldwide.
Yes,
Yeah.
worldwide. And at the hospital nearby, I was invited to go with a larger group of Afghan women as well in the military to help celebrate. And part of the surprise when we got there is that some of the children came in traditional costumes, and they sang to us. And of course, we're all thoroughly enjoying that, because this is the future of Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
And this is one of my favorite photos here. We really had a good time. They enjoyed themselves, and to see them going to school and feeling good. They were very positive. They were enjoying entertaining us. In fact, one of the things about the Army, the armies have to fight wars sometimes, but what the Afghan National Security Forces are doing is creating security in Afghanistan so children like this can go to school.
Absolutely.
A perfect example, during the Taliban, I saw an estimate that only 900,000 children were going to school,
Right.
and mostly boys.
Right.
Well, today they estimate that 8 million children are going
right.
to school, and a third of those are girls.
Right.
The number of teachers that are working today, civilian teachers that are working today, used to be 20,000 in, I think it's 2002. Today it's 175,000 teachers
Makes a
that are
big
out there
difference.
giving all levels of education and training. So to me, I look at a picture like this with the children, and understanding that while it's been a long road and more work needs to happen, there's great things happening that'll help pave the way for children to continue to grow and to have a safe and prosperous future Afghanistan.
Absolutely. The basic foundation of society naturally is education, but to have education, you need security. In fact, you mentioned educators. My mother actually was a high school principal back in Afghanistan, and also an administrator for the district. And so I know all well how important it is to have someone, especially in Afghanistan, where folks really look up to their moms when it comes to everyday affairs, whether it be at home or even at school, and how they train you and how they teach you the way of life. And so it certainly is important to integrate women into the teaching, and specifically into the workforce itself.
Absolutely. In fact, I attended a couple of meetings at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, and they very much understood that. we want to teach the entire population, but teaching a woman, you're actually teaching a child as well, because
That's
she's going to
right.
go back to her home and teach
Absolutely.
the children and maybe others who not have an opportunity to go to school.
Absolutely, and it's multiple folks, and then they go on and share it with their friends, and it just becomes a multiplier effect over a course of time. Just one drop of rain, so to speak, turns into a river. And if there was a message that you had, if you could share with the young population, either here in the U.S. And in the West, and also those back home, what message would it be that can help energize the efforts to come together and move forward?
That's a good question. I think it's to continue to have courage. There's so much progress that it's hard in a short period of time to see progress sometimes. But like you said, drop by drop, a river is formed.
Right.
And so if everyone continues to take these brave and correct steps forward, Afghan security and prosperity will come together over time, as it has been over the last 10 years. More progress is needed, but courage and people talking to each other and working together, I think it'll head in the right direction. I'm also confident because while the U.S. just recently signed the Strategic Partnership Agreement with Afghanistan,
Right.
while the coalition's role and the U.S.'s role will change in progress, we are committed, and we will be involved past 2014. I know everybody's concerned about that, but I personally was excited when I heard about the Strategic Partnership Agreement, because as hard as the Afghan people are working to progress, I know we're going to be there alongside them in some form or fashion, not necessarily just in the military,
security, right.
but our U.S. Population and the government is committed for the long run.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you, I'm a history buff, and I read everything I can about history, and as they say, history repeats itself, and so it certainly helps to learn about past mistakes. And I have yet to see a time in world history where 40 countries came together to help out one small country, like in a case where we have now. And there are a lot of positive developments in every category, whether you consider, for example, the U.S. In itself, or the coalition forces, or even some of the countries that are in the region that do business with that country. And there's quite a bit of progress, but Afghanistan has a golden opportunity. This opportunity is Afghanistan's opportunity to take advantage of this help, whether it be with language, whether it be with trade, whether it be with education, whatever it may be. And I used to really preach exactly this same speech that I'm preaching now when I was at the Ministry of Finance in Afghanistan. And it is certainly an opportunity for the Afghans to stand up, rise, and have security, and really for the locals to have a normal life where they don't have to worry about their security. And that's why we wanted to have you here on the show, to provide a perspective, because there's a myth that maybe training is not going well, maybe some folks aren't being integrated. We addressed both, and specifically bringing women into the forces. Really want to thank you for your time, for your insights, and more importantly for what you did for My Heritage, and of course for America. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.